Hey everyone, Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast here. We've got Jenna, Harner on, and we're going to address all the crazy rumors that we continue to spin. You heard us talk about Aaron Rodgers on Wednesday. Well, here we are talking about Trevor Lawrence on Friday. Why people need to relax when it comes to this quarterback stuff as far as how it's processing. We'll talk about that and why the Steelers trading up isn't exactly an impossible thing for them to do to get their quarterback of the future next NFL draft. That and a call-in line question on Art Rooney. All here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if you hit your first bet of $5 or more. Join FanDuel.com to get started. Jenna, we're back. We are glad to have you back, but there is yet another quarterback to Steelers trade movement rumor, as it was coming out on Thursday. It was Ryan Burr, who's a golf reporter, which caught me this off guard, but he said this Thursday morning: Steelers inquiring about Lawrence speaks volumes to Steelers' unwillingness to just run it back with Wilson or Fields. Don't believe Jags have interest, but said that the Steelers were willing to move a first and a second to go make this happen. And now here's the thing: this was immediately shut down. Michael DeRocco of ESPN shut it down. Mark Caboli shut it down. Like, so many people shut this down. But Jenna, it is astounding to me that we are going to keep doing this for eternity until it's solidified. The Steelers aren't going to do that this year.
There's so many directions that you can start with this conversation. First off, if the Adam Schefters, the Ian Rappaports, the Jeremy Fowlers of the world aren't tweeting this, don't believe it. That's as simple as that, because and then Jeremy Fowler came out earlier on Thursday and retweeted Michael Rocco, who debunked it. It's just,
yes.
I have so many thoughts and feelings on all of it, but look, it's the off season. There are going to be these stupid, crazy, insane rumors, but stop and think for 30 seconds, because the Jags would have to eat $100 million in dead money if this happened, on top of the fact that if it did happen this year, they would lose $83 million in cap. In what world? Anytime you see those numbers, it's just oh yeah, why would that make sense ever? Why would a team be just why? And I'm not saying that certain reporters can't get scoops and that the insiders are always the ones that have things. But if someone's coming out with something and an insider isn't immediately saying, hey, I can confirm this report, or I'm also hearing this, it's probably not true.
Yes.
And don't believe everything you see or read.
Yep. It's just look, there's times to explore things. It's fun to speculate in times, but when things come out like this and then we talk about it like it's fact, it's just no, it's come on, guys. Let's think our way through this for just a little bit. Also, on the side of financially, it wouldn't make sense for the Jaguars to do this. Why would the Steelers go and get Trevor Lawrence? They have Trevor Lawrence at home in Justin Fields. Same draft, similar records. Not that different. The only difference is that Trevor Lawrence has passed a lot more than Justin Fields, because he has been a franchise quarterback in every single year. But Justin Fields has been demoted from that already. But quarterback rating, 85 for Trevor Lawrence, 83.9 for Justin Fields. Completion percentage, 63.3 for Trevor Lawrence, 61.1 for Justin Fields. 46 interceptions with Trevor Lawrence, 31 interceptions with Justin Fields. The only thing that is significantly different is their rushing numbers, which Justin Fields dwarfs his, because that's what he does. I don't. And so I look at this and I say, why would the Steelers let alone trade. But why would they trade a first and a second to go get a dude that is markedly the same thing as Justin Fields right now, when you can just sign Justin Fields without trading for anything and he knows your system? It just, none of that makes sense.
And I think too, also, okay, we're going to have fun. We're playing into this here.
Yeah.
I think most Steelers fans, if you asked them who they would want, at least the ones that I talk to and I know and I've seen reactions on Twitter, would want Fields over Lawrence because of the mobility factor.
Yes. Like, I'm right with you, Jenna. I'm right.
And I mean, the front office as well, but the fans too.
Yeah. And like, look, there's the theories out there that the Steelers might not go with Fields or Wilson, and maybe that's fueling some of this. And I feel like that's what's happening right now, is that the Steelers are all quiet on the media front right now as far as what their actual plans are. There might be rumblings that are being sneaked out, like Jerry Dulac, saying that, like, hey, what happened to Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson? Art Rooney telling all the reporters that were there saying, hey, like, it's going to be, if we go with either one, it's going to be one or the other and not both. Like, there's been those type of breadcrumbs thrown out. But as the Steelers, one of the biggest franchises of the NFL as far as name recognition and their staying power in the league, they don't have their quarterback on their roster for 2025 and 2026. So that's going to lead to questions. It's going to lead to panics, and then you're going to get speculation. And again, speculation is fine. That's what a lot of people have done. That's what we are here. But like, healthy speculation, not trading for Caleb Williams, not doing insane things like that. Like, at some point, the Steelers are going to get linked to every quarterback. And just this Wednesday, we talked about the Aaron Rodgers rumor that floated around, and everyone's just like, why would they go get Aaron Rodgers? He's older than Russell Wilson. He looked even more faded than Russell Wilson did this year. And he was no. Why would you bring the Pat McAfee show into your game? That's just so a non-Steelers move. You could look at Matt Stafford. Matt Stafford might make some sense, but he's also older. I get that the Steelers haven't made the move yet on Justin Fields, but until I see them officially, like, Justin Fields hits free agency and goes somewhere else, and as does Russell Wilson, I don't see the Steelers going outside of those two unless something really goes wrong in negotiations and they just can't get either to the salary cap number that they really want.
And I keep going back to my conversation with Art Rooney II after the season ended a couple weeks back, where I asked him, I said, what specific traits are you looking for in your next quarterback? And he came out immediately, excuse me, and said mobility. Granted, he did, and I continue to add this caveat, he did talk about mobility for probably 15 seconds or so and then say, but there are also some really good pocket passers in the league. So to me, in my mind, that was kind of saying, okay, here's what Justin Fields brings, here's what Russell, but also we still think Russell Wilson is good in what he does. And to me, that feels a little bit like the security blanket of, if they can't get Justin Fields, they still want Russ to feel like they still value him, they still care, they still want him on the team if he is that option. And granted, and I'm not saying that I'm hearing anything, I'm not saying any of that, just the way that I interpreted that when I asked him, what specific traits are you looking for in your next quarterback? He went to mobility first. Yeah. And that to me indicates, and also too, Trevor Lawrence isn't that mobile.
Yeah.
That's not
he can get around, but he's not fast.
Yeah. He's not the, you can't add what you would be able to add to the offense with Justin Fields, the designed runs, those types of things on a consistent basis that you would for a Trevor Lawrence. Like, that to me debunks it right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, on top of all of the other like salary cap and salary logic.
1000%. And I want to talk more about this quarterback situation because shortly, like right around this conversation, I got into it with a Steelers fan and kind of went back and forth. And it was just a reminder of, like, the Steelers, if they're going to make a move in an NFL draft to get their franchise quarterback, it is something that is very doable without having to tank. And I want to talk about literally the history of most of our lifetime as adults, our adult lifetime watching football, and why there are examples of that. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast with Jenna Harner here from Channel 11 WPXI. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. When the games tip off, the NBA action is just beginning on FanDuel, America's number one sportsbook, because FanDuel is your home for NBA betting. So even if you missed the first few minutes of the game or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can make your picks with the first whistle until the final buzzer. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. However you want to play, now is the perfect time to join. New FanDuel customers can get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com to get your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI, who had her internet go out on her mid-show for a little bit there, but we got
power went out 3 times, little lights flickering. I'm like, what's happening? But I think we're back. I hope we're back. Let's just hope it stays this way.
Let's hope it stays this way, because Chris likes to limit how much editing he has to do as much as possible. But okay. Jenna, sticking on the quarterback conversation, I wanted to bring this up because there is this notion that the Steelers should tank. They should just blow it up, stink for a year, and then just go get their quarterback, because that is what good teams do to recover and get their quarterback of the future. And everyone will hold up. Look at Joe Burrow. The Bengals went 0-16 or wherever they went to get him first overall, and now he's there and he's doing awesome. And you can hold up a few other examples over the years. You could say Cam Newton was a first overall pick, and they can say that. So I'm also like the far majority of teams that actually do tank and get into the top 10, oftentimes they do not get their guy. And so I went back I counted all the quarterbacks drafted in the top 10 of the NFL draft. And those are teams that, tanking range. Their season was so bad, they got a top 10 pick naturally, something the Steelers haven't done since, I want to say, Troy Edwards. Maybe Plaxico Burress was the last guy in that run. It's been 2.5 decades since the Steelers have been in that conversation. Ben Roethlisberger was the 11th overall pick, and even he wasn't a top 10 pick. But point being, I went back to 2010. There were from 2010 to 2022, because I'm not going to do the last 2 years of quarterbacks, give those guys time to grow. I'm not going to call them busts yet. But there were 25 quarterbacks selected between 2010 and 2022. Only 5 of those 25 quarterbacks picked in the top 10 can be considered hits. When I look at it, I'll consider Andrew Luck, even though he got hurt. He was certainly a franchise quarterback. I'll consider Josh Allen certainly playing at that level. Joe Burrow certainly playing at that level. Cam Newton was did that. So you look at those guys, a small handful. But when you go back throughout the years, from the Jake Locker was the 8th overall pick. Blaine Gabbert was the 10th overall pick. Carson Wentz, Jared Goff, Mitch Trubisky, Sam Darnold, Baker Mayfield, Josh Rosen, Daniel Jones. And again, we just talked about Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence was the first overall pick, and he's not playing anywhere near that. And then right after him, the next 2 picks, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance. All these franchises, you look at all of that, it is just despair and failures across the board. I counted by my book, because I said they're also like guys like Kyler Murray. I'm like, I'm not sure if Kyler Murray is a real hit, because he's not playing great, but he's also not solving all the franchise's problems right now. So I kind of I had 18 misses to 5 hits in the top 10 going back from 2022 to 2010. And this is just a reminder, the one hit that really hits the most is, of course, Patrick Mahomes.
There you go.
I had to go back. Jenna, he is the only quarterback selected in the top 10 of the NFL draft who has won a Super Bowl for the team as a starting quarterback for the team that drafted him, going all the way back to Eli Manning of the Ben Roethlisberger draft. It is, so just to show you, that is not the formula to becoming Super Bowl champions, is just tanking to get this quarterback. It does not happen.
No, and it also does not seem like the formula the Steelers are going to follow or are going to want to follow. Let me bring up Mike Tomlin's end of the season press conference when he was asked, when you look at the teams that are still playing, so this was, this divisional round teams, A lot of these quarterbacks were taken way at the top of the draft. You guys very rarely pick there. How do you see a way forward? Russ is 36, obviously not a long-term plan to get back to elite play at the quarterback position and potentially having a season where you have to take a step back, part of that equation. To which Mike Tomlin said, Lamar Jackson wasn't taken at the top of the draft. Jalen Hurts wasn't taken in the first round. So I don't know that I necessarily agree with that question. And Mike Tomlin is one of the big 3 decision makers within that organization on where they go, what they do, who they bring in, who they look to draft. He's telling us sometimes Mike Tomlin doesn't tell us everything. That right there to me is one of those, like, I am going to be honest with you all the reporters, all the television reporters, all the fans in that moment, everybody listening to that press conference. I think that was a moment of honesty where he's like, yeah, some of those guys weren't. And I don't think that that's the route the Steelers are going to go, nor quite frankly, do I think it's going to be the route they're going to have the opportunity to go, nor should they trade up. Because again, if this team was legitimately a quarterback away, and which they're not, and if this or next year, I will stick with this year, and if this year was a draft that was very quarterback heavy, which it's not, and it's not solid in any means, then you might have some conversations. But it's so much more to me of your scouting team, your front office staff that is tasked with identifying those traits that you look at and you say, that's a franchise quarterback. That's going to be a guy that we have success in and we have belief in. I look at the way that the Bills found, drafted Josh Allen, that type of process, but none of these things are going to happen this year.
Right. Like this isn't the year to do that. Also, again, when we're looking at all the top 10 quarterbacks that have been selected since Eli Manning was the first overall pick of the 2004 NFL draft, I was literally in high school.
You don't want to know what I was.
I don't. Please don't. I don't need to be reminded how old I am. The only quarterback is Patrick Mahomes to win that Super Bowl, picked in the top 10 of that. He also was picked by a team who traded up to get him because the Chiefs were the 27th overall pick, and they did not trade away some super haul to get him. They traded their first rounder that year. So they traded the 27th for the 10th, really just a flip of those picks, a third round of that year, and a first year, the first round of the next. I think people would be fine if the Steelers traded up to get a franchise level quarterback for one future first rounder and a third round pick and your first rounder that year that you're swapping for. Essentially, you lost one extra first round. They didn't give away. It wasn't like the Herschel Walker trade where the Cowboys just got all the assets in the world for him. It wasn't like they traded 3 first round. They traded one extra first rounder to do that. If the Steelers can go and get the guy now, if your qualm is I don't know if the Steelers are going to be good enough to scout and find that quarterback, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
But tanking don't help nobody because clearly it hasn't helped anybody win a Super Bowl by doing that to get their quarterback since the Giants were the first overall pick back in the same year the Steelers drafted Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah, no, it doesn't lie. The numbers, all of it doesn't lie. You can look at it and see it and say, yeah, it was Eli Manning and Patrick Mahomes. And again, it's not even like you talk about the tanking part. Again, they traded up for Mahomes. It's the tanking part. And it's not this guaranteed science. It's not this guaranteed formula. Like that's part of what makes the NFL the NFL and the way it's so thrilling and the way that there's so much parity kind of consistently because there is so much turnover in this way. But it's just, it doesn't, it's not going to be the answer. That the tanking to see, maybe they'll end up in the top 5. Like also, I don't think the Steelers are capable of being that bad of a football team.
They haven't been for either of our like you'd have to go back. The last time they had a losing record was the 2003 season, which is when they traded. Well, they didn't trade up. They picked Ben Roethlisberger after that season, but since then they have not fallen below 500. In fact, they've been a winning team. Since their last 8-8 season, which I believe was 2019. So you look at how the Steelers have managed things, and you see how Pittsburgh wants to burn things down right now because they're 10-7 for a couple seasons, and they haven't won a playoff game in some years. And I get that.
Yeah.
This town would not be able to stomach a 6-win season, let alone a 2-win season. Like that, people have not understood that kind of pain. And so when people like Ryan Clark come out on the pivot and say, man, Steelers fans are spoiled, I get what they mean, because some of y'all do not understand what true mediocrity is, true terrible coaching is. That when you go, like, for example, Kyle Shanahan, revered as one of the best coaches in the NFL right now. He's made it to 2 Super Bowls. He's also had 4 losing seasons in 8 years. And in those losing seasons, they've fallen completely apart and gotten there. And I'm not so sure they're going to rebound from this last one that they've gotten. But there's so many teams out there that fall apart. And when they fall apart, when you fall apart, it's very hard to build it back up. Unless you get lucky and you get your superstar. And again, it's luck. Like right now, this year, Jaden Daniels, first year, you know what? Maybe he is the guy. But guess who that same franchise drafted, who's among that list of quarterbacks that we counted as misses in that span there? RG3. And what did RG3 have? A really awesome first year where everyone thought he was going to be the franchise guy, and it fell apart. Granted, you don't have Daniel Snyder to mess him up anymore. And Jaden Daniels, there was a lot of injuries that went with RG3. There's a lot there. But I'm not, last year we all thought CJ Stroud was going to take over the league. People figured him out a little bit. I'm eager to see how do people adjust to Jaden Daniels. Yeah. I look at this, Jenna, and I just think there's a reason why the Steelers, why it's a bad idea to tank, and that the Steelers plan right now needs to be building the roster, not just selling out for the one quarterback. If you build the roster, go ahead and get it. But like you said, they got a lot of other priorities: D-line, O-line, receiver, corner, that they absolutely can fix with the prospects that are in front of them in this draft and in free agency.
No, I completely agree. And also, too, you talk about tanking. You think TJ Watt's going to really be okay with that?
Exactly.
Cam Hayward's going to be like the leaders on this team who gut and grind. Like, I mean, all of the guys on the team, realistically, but like those leaders that we talk about week in and week out, like there's not a chance in heck that either of them are going to be okay with that and be like, yeah, you know what? We're not going to give it our, like, it just, when you say it out loud, it's one of those, like, that's not going to happen.
Right. They don't want to, people don't want to stick around. In fact, that's what got the Steelers Minkah Fitzpatrick. And granted, Minkah Fitzpatrick didn't have a great year or anything like that this year, but he's been a multi-year first-team all-pro superstar safety for the Steelers because he didn't want to be with the Dolphins when they were tanking, when it was clear to him that they're not trying to win. They're going to want to go somewhere where they are. That's why Myles Garrett wants to be traded from the Browns right now. He doesn't want to be around because he looked around and said, ooh, cap situation is pretty bad. This team still doesn't have the resources. They're still tied to Deshaun Watson. I want to win a Super Bowl. Get me out of here. That's why TJ Watt's not going anywhere. And also, for example, one of the quarterbacks I consider a hit in that span of 2010 to 2022 is Joe Burrow. Who's Joe Burrow's team? The Cincinnati Bengals. They got him. I believe they went 0 and whatever. Or, they were the first overall pick to get Joe Burrow. And certainly they were the first overall pick at the exact right time. And it was great for them to hit that. But here's the problem. They tanked to do that. They tanked and got Jamar Chase, but they still have all these other issues that because they haven't been able to keep players. In fact, they got players right now who are saying trade me from the team. And that's why they're not hitting with Joe Burrow right now. And in fact, you look at what the Bengals have done with Joe Burrow. Sure, they went to the Super Bowl that 1 year, but outside of that, have they done a whole lot this year with Joe Burrow healthy and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Trey Hendrickson playing, leading the league in sacks? They still finished third behind the Steelers this season. They still got whooped on their own field by the Steelers this season. And in fact, they have missed the playoffs more times since they've drafted Joe Burrow than they've made the playoffs. And the part of it is because with their tanking, they don't have the O-line, they don't have the defense, they have so many missing parts of their roster because they can't keep guys because they're tanking, because they have to rebuild these things. That's what the Steelers are trying to avoid being like, because when you're in that stage, even if you hit on a superstar or two, it is not easy to hit enough to just hit all in one rebuild and just get all your superstars.
Yeah, no, you say it perfectly. I echo all of that. I agree with all of that because, again, it's one of those, it's fun to speculate. It's fun to say, oh, what if? But in reality, that's not what's going to happen. And also, again, it's so topical, but the Eagles, the way they built this team through the draft through free agency shows kind of exactly the blueprint of, and how hard is it going to be? Probably very hard to recreate that if you're any other team in the league. But we always talk about after a team wins the Super Bowl, how did they do it? What was their offseason like? How did they get there? I mean, again, the way the Eagles have drafted, developed, built through the trenches, added Saquon Barkley in his phenomenal run game to an already really potent offense, having a bunch of former first-round picks on teams that weren't having success. And they said, hey, come here. You're bringing in A.J. Brown, drafting Devontae Smith, drafting Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell this year, bringing in Zach Bonnet. Like, that to me is one of the ways that if you look at the Steelers, you're like, okay, this is how a team like this can kind of rebuild while also not having to have a 13 or having a 3 and doing math in my head, 15 season. Is that right now?
Yeah.
15, 14, 3 and 14.
Yeah. 3 and 14. It'll be 3 and 15 soon because they apparently want to add another game to the NFL season. Also, I think the Bengals were 2 and 14 when they drafted Joe Burrow. And again, that's not how you build. That's not how you build. Because even when you do hit and you hit the 5 out of 25 players there, you got to have something around it. And again, I think it says something. The one team that is picked inside the top 10 and gotten their quarterback, not only traded up for it, but had a nucleus for Patrick Mahomes to be around, for him to just be plugged into in his second year and say, hey, now you have a lot to work with. And that's why that guy has 3 Super Bowl wins in his first, 7-8 seasons in the NFL.
Yep.
So that point had to be made when we're talking about just going and getting quarterbacks and doing all that. When we come back, I want to talk to Jenna about Art Rooney because there was a question called into us about him. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Jenna Harner, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I remind you this show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Football season may be over, but basketball season is in full swing, and there's no better way to stay in the game than with Prize Picks, the best place for daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could up to 1,000 times your cash. The best part, Prize Picks is quick and easy. You can set up your lineup in less than 60 seconds, and their fast and secure withdrawals mean I get my winnings in as little as 15 minutes. Plus, I love their weekly promos like Taco Tuesday, where you get your discounted player projections for even better value. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's on Prize Picks. Prize Picks. Run your game. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Jenna Harner, keeping it going here. Let's go to our call-in line. As always, you can call in to the show at 412-223-6644. Just leave your name, where you're from, keep your question under a minute, and we'll try to keep your we'll get your question on the show. We get a lot of questions, and we try to filter through them. But I wanted to get this one now because Jenna is a person who got to talk to Art Rooney one-on-one. Not too many people get that opportunity. And this is a question about Art Rooney and how he's handled things. Now, this caller's call kind of fades out in the beginning, so I'm hoping I got the name right. I believe that their name is Francisco, and they're from California. But Francisco, take it away in your question.
Hey, Chris. This is Francisco from Vesela, California. I have a question about Art Rooney. Is Art Rooney a cheap owner? Because I see these other teams getting these other high-profile players, and I mean the Steelers haven't even done any good moves on the recent years, man. I love your show, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisco. As always, you can call like Francisco did into the number at 412-223-6644 to get your name, get your question on the show. Be sure to leave your name, where you're from, give your question in under a minute, and we will try to get you on the show. Jenna, I think there's this distinction that I know there's probably some viewers and listeners that are like we know about this, but there's a lot of people who don't. So let's make it. The problem is not about acquiring players. I mean, you acquire talent, sure, but it's not paying players that the Roonies have a problem. This is not Bob Nutting and the Pittsburgh Pirates, who just refuses to pay anybody anything ever, even when he has like a Cy Young pitcher in his okay. Don't give me that about the Pirates. This is about the Steelers. Woosah. But this is not like that, where the Steelers are paying up to the salary cap every year. Like the only time that they have space between that is when they give them like that $8 million cushion in case they need to sign somebody at the end of the year because someone gets hurt and they need just an emergency player to fill in and they need to move money around. But the Steelers, they pay TJ Watt top dollar. They pay Baker Fitzpatrick top dollar. They're paying Cam Hayward top dollar. When they get their guys, they keep their guys. And that is why you don't see them being big free agent players most years, because normally they're too busy paying the players. They've developed themselves. And that's why you see them not offering out these $40 million contracts to people in free agency. Granted, they might be in the market to pay somebody big this year.
Yeah, no, it definitely feels like that could be the case. But again, there's a reason why the Steelers love this draft and develop mentality so much, because they want to have these homegrown guys where, hey, we saw them in college. We scouted them. We loved what they brought. They come to the Steelers. They're a massive part of what this team can do. They see them and envision them being here for a long time. And when it's time to pick up their fifth-year options and pay them the way that they should be paid, they tend to do that when it's guys, again, like TJ Watt, like Cam Hayward, like those franchise cornerstones, even, Pat Freiermuth in this way too, still getting paid very, very solid money. You and I were talking, though, because there could be money spent in other ways. And I think the Steelers should be looking at what the Baltimore Ravens are doing right now and the way that they are branching out their coaching staff even more. And that's where you can look at Art Rooney and say, hey, maybe the organization should spend some more money that way in terms of, hey, we are going to bring in these young coaching minds.
There you go.
We are going to add positions on the coaching staff. We are going to make our coaching staff bigger and give a lot of young guys opportunity. Also, not a bad thing for Mike Tomlin himself to grow his coaching tree in that way too. So that's a way money can be spent. And that's where you can say, look, Art Rooney as an owner could be spending more money in that direction, but it's nothing with the team.
Right. And nothing with the roster.
The roster.
Right. But that's where I was going to go next. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where the complaints are, is that the Steelers have one of the smallest coaching staffs. And so you also look at that. There's also the rumors that the Steelers don't pay their coaches as competitively as other teams pay their coaches. There's rumors that, like, I think Terrell Austin's salary is like $1 million. Penn State openly is paying their defensive coordinator in college about $3.5 million, which I think is what Mike Tomlin makes. So, like, there's that question of maybe the Steelers paying for coaches, and maybe that's where they're limiting themselves. And that's where Art Rooney is being cheap. And I think that's a fair criticism when you look at it. Brooke Pryor, we had on this Wednesday for our show from ESPN. She asked Art Rooney directly, and he cut her off, saying, we're not adding to the coaching staff. We don't need to add it to the coaching staff. But you look at what other teams are doing, like the Ravens. They got defensive analysts. They got run game and pass game specialists on both sides of the ball, plus other assistants. The Steelers coaches, they're handling 3 jobs at the same time, and maybe that's limiting just how much attention they can put in certain places and leading to some of these problems that we keep saying, coaching's the big issue here.
I think we keep going back. I mean, we saw everybody that watched Hard Knocks. You can see the reason to add a guy like a defensive analyst for when the Steelers and the Ravens were playing. I don't remember if it was the playoff game or if it was, I think it was
the second game.
It was the second. Yeah. It was the first game in Baltimore before the playoff game in Baltimore, where this defensive analyst his one job is to study the Steelers consistently. And he said, look, Russell Wilson doesn't have, I'm going to mess up the basketball euphemism here in that way, but
layups and 3-pointers.
Yeah. He has layups and 3-pointers. He doesn't have a jumper. Was that it?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. He doesn't have a mid-range game.
It doesn't have that mid-range game. And the way that the Ravens defense played the Steelers and limited them that game. I mean, granted, also the Steelers made offensive mistakes in that game too, but having a role like that on the coaching staff is somewhere where I think the Steelers could look to expand. I don't think they're going to, but that would be something where it's like, okay, you should be spending money in this direction to branch out, to kind of come into more of the modern side of the game in that way.
No, I'm right with you. Like, this is what the Steelers should be spending in. Like, that's where facilities are another question there, because you see some of the other facilities and how, like, the Steelers, that's one thing that the Steelers get voted very low in. Consistently, is just down the line is like, hey, like, they have one of the less updated facilities in pro football. So, like, if you're talking about already being cheap it's the accusations of the limited coaching staff and not updating the facilities as often as some other teams. When it comes to picking the players and adding to the roster, they do not spare any expense there. They offer top of the line contracts. It's also part of why you have the salary cap, because there's not just a cap, there's also a floor. Teams have to spend. You can't just tank in the NFL by not acquiring players. You have to go spend a certain much. That's why that's why like the Bob Nuttings of baseball can't do what they do in football. Now, granted, there are teams like that, like the Bengals are notorious for handling their things a little more cheaply as well. But again, like the Steelers, I think they found a way to thrive while having their business model, and maybe they're not willing to give it up just yet. But this is where the rubber's got to meet the road. Is like, okay, if you're going to keep having the limited coaching staffs, you need them to bang with these teams that have these accelerated coaching staffs that are growing and they're expanding. And that's where I think the big question is going to come is when will enough be enough in that regard? Or will they beat that? Will they beat the odds?
Yeah, or exactly. Will that be the case? I mean, again, with Mike Tomlin at the helm and the way that I know fans are frustrated, and reasonably so in terms of his lack of playoff success, but there's a reason why so many players want to play for Mike Tomlin and say openly, I'd love to play for a coach like that, why he gets rated so highly in these player polls. And that seems like it's one of the only high things the Steelers are rated on in those NFL PA anonymous surveys. But that, how much longer can the front office hang their hat on that? I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's a big question here. So thank you for your question, Francisco. Again, answering your question, it's if the Rooneys are cheap, it's not about players. It's going to be about expanding the coaching staff and moving forward from there. We covered a lot of ground today on quarterback talk, potential trades, and draft history from Steelers spending, but we're always happy to do that on the Locked On Steelers podcast, especially with Jenna Harner's around. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us. Let people can find you, follow you, get more of your work.
Well, thank you for having me as always. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner11, Instagram, Jenna_Harner, and locally in Pittsburgh, WPXI TV channel 11. So stay tuned.
Absolutely. She's Jenna Harner. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias. Same handle everywhere at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday. Break it down your Pittsburgh Steelers. Back here Monday with more on your Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.